All right, so I posted some things. Listen up. I posted some things on BSpace this weekend. So in addition to the notes for class this week, I also posted actually not one, but two problem sets / study guide sets for you to have a look at. So these are questions that just test your knowledge of the material that we're going through, try to challenge you in some cases to think a little bit more deeply about the material and the kinds of questions that, or at least the kinds of material that you want to be familiar with for the exam. The exam, as you know, is in just under 3 weeks. It's going to be a multiple choice exam. Actually, I guess it's 3 weeks, right? 3 weeks, yeah. Multiple choice exam, and closer to the time, we're going to have review sessions going on. My review session is going to be Friday night, February 22nd, if you want to make a note of that, 7 to 9 p.m. We'll make an announcement about that closer to the time, okay? So that's what's coming up. This week, so we've been sort of flying through the book so far, but we're going to slow down a little bit this week. We're going to spend more time on Chapter 8. And the reason is that Chapter 8 really starts to get into some of the fundamentals of biochemistry, understanding what enzymes are, how they work, the kinds of reactions that are carried out in the body. And these are really critical concepts for you to come away from Bio 1A understanding. You'll need them for, if you're going on in any upper division classes in biochemistry, this is a very important foundation for all of that. If you're pre-pharmacy or pre-med, this is very important for the kinds of things that you'll need to know when you go on in professional school and also to prepare for the exams to get into those professional schools. Okay, so that's why we spend a bit of extra time on this material. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start talking about the fundamentals of metabolism, and the relevant pages in the book are shown here. And what I want to do is go through basically why we need enzymes. We're going to talk a little bit about what metabolic pathways are, a very little bit about thermodynamics, free energy, what it is, how we use it in biology, think about it. And then we're also going to give a very brief introduction to enzymes, and again, what they are and what they do, and how we as biologists can study them and understand their function. Okay. So the chapter starts off by pointing out that cells are basically very small chemical factories where thousands of reactions are going on all the time. Right? So the cell's job is to extract and use energy in different ways. So it uses energy to perform work. It's not making energy, right? It's just harvesting it from food molecules, chemicals that come in to the cell, and as we'll see, provide energy that can be then employed to do other things, to do work in the cell. Some organisms convert energy to light, as in bioluminescence. That means organisms that can actually generate light by converting the chemical energy from molecules into light. So to think about this, we have to first define metabolism, and it basically means all of an organism's chemical reactions. So if we use that word, we're basically talking about all of the processes that are at any one time in a cell or an organism are building up molecules by first breaking them down, right? So using energy from the breakdown of complex molecules to build other kinds of molecules. That's essentially what metabolism involves. And it's essentially, your book defines it as an emergent property of life that arises from the interactions between different kinds of molecules in a cell. So it's the totality of all of that chemistry that's going on in the cell. And so the way that we think about this in biology, of course, is very complicated, right? And so we typically will talk about metabolic pathways, meaning that we're starting off with a particular type of molecule, a substrate A over here, and then this molecule is being converted in a series of chemical reactions to a second compound, then a third, and then a fourth. That's sort of a very simplified view of a metabolic pathway. And very importantly, in biology, each of those chemical reactions is occurring its rate is being accelerated by an enzyme that's catalyzing that reaction. Now, these enzymes, as we talked about, are incredibly specific. So they have the ability to bind to a very specific kind of substrate molecule and not other ones, and convert that substrate to a particular product. And that's incredibly important in biology. And in fact, many of the genetic diseases that we know about come about because of defects in these kinds of pathways. For example, a single amino acid change in an enzyme molecule can often trigger it to either catalyze the wrong reaction or catalyze the right reaction but at the wrong time or in the wrong quantities, and that can lead to all sorts of disease phenotypes like cancer, for example. That's often what happens. So it's very important to understand how these kinds of metabolic processes work, because it turns out that in many cases, if we want to affect the outcome of a pathway, we need to understand what the enzymes are that do these reactions, and many times these kinds of enzymes can turn out to be therapeutic targets for drugs. Let's see, right. So these pathways are going on all the time, and it can be a little bit deceptive, I think, in class or sometimes when you read the textbook, because we're talking about a single enzyme, or we might be talking about a single reaction or even a single set of reactions. But you should remember that in the cell, it's a mess, right? I mean, there's a ton of stuff going on all the time. Now, this poster, this is a poster, right? And you can actually get it in high resolution if you want to on the internet. Now, when I was a graduate student or even in college, there was a version of this poster that existed, but it was probably, about half as dense as it is now. So we just keep discovering more and more regulation and additional kinds of enzymes, et cetera, that are going on, that are exist in cells, and pathways that are underway in cells. And so it's just useful to keep in mind that the complexity of metabolism is pretty vast. And when you hear the term systems biology, you might hear that word a lot now. People are typically talking about this, right? They're talking about trying to manipulate or understand not just one enzyme or even one small set of enzymes, but an entire network of interacting pathways in a cell. So it's a fascinating area of biology, but clearly very complex. So I want, as we do in biology, we need to define some terms and make sure that we understand how we use these terms. So first of all, metabolic pathways can either be fundamentally pathways that are breaking down molecules into from complex to more simple chemicals, and they can also go the other way. They can be pathways that are building up more complex molecules from simpler starting materials. So we can define a catabolic pathway as one that releases energy by breaking down complex molecules into simpler compounds. Right. So a great example of this is called cellular respiration, which is the breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen. Right. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in class, but this is a process that's fundamentally a catabolic type of metabolism. And then the opposite of this, of course, is an anabolic pathway. So you've probably heard of anabolic steroids, for example, right? So these are pathways that lead to the buildup of more complex molecules, such as building up molecules that are involved in making muscle tissue. And these are pathways that consume energy because they require an input of compounds to build up more complex molecules. So an example of this would be the synthesis of proteins from amino acid building blocks. So this is an example of an anabolic pathway in the cell. And then the term bioenergetics, this is just the study of how organisms manage their energy resources, right? How they acquire the molecules they need to have the energy to carry out the metabolism that's required for the growth and survival really of the cell in response to environmental stimuli and things like that. So whenever we think about metabolism, we actually have to think a little bit about energy, what it is, how we define it, and in particular in biology, the types of energy that come into play in the cell or in metabolic pathways. So a very basic definition of energy is simply the capacity to cause change in matter, right? It's the capacity to cause change in matter. So it exists in different kinds of forms that can perform work. We can talk about kinetic energy, which is associated with motion. Heat energy, which is a type of kinetic energy that's associated with random movement of atoms or molecules. There's potential energy, that is energy possessed by matter because of its location or its structure. And then there's chemical energy that is, again, is potential energy, but it's available for release in the context of a chemical reaction. And very importantly, energy can be converted from one form to another. It can't be created, right, but it can be converted from one form to another. So your book goes through this sort of example here that shows these divers that are climbing up a set of steps, reaching a platform where they have potential energy based on the height above the water, and then diving off the platform into this lake, which is converting this potential energy on the platform to kinetic energy as this person is entering the water. Once they're in the water, they have less potential energy, obviously, than they did on the platform. And then they have to, if they want to climb back up and dive off again, they have to expend chemical energy to climb up the stairs, right? And through the action of their muscles, climbing up the stairs, using some energy, chemical energy that they got from eating food. And then they get back up to the platform. They now have potential energy that they can use to convert to kinetic energy, et cetera. Okay? So it's a very macro example of this, but the same thing goes on with molecules, it turns out. And we'll go through some examples of this today and in the rest of the week. Now, when we talk about energy transformation, we really have to talk about, we have to bring up this term and define it, thermodynamics, which is the study of energy transformations. And I want to just point out that, and you probably already know this, but if you have a closed system, this is a system that is isolated from its surroundings. And again, this is an example from your book, talks about a thermos bottle that's closed up, and it's not, of course, not entirely closed, right? But over time, it'll reach equilibrium. But it's a sort of an isolated system. But organisms are actually open systems, right? We are interacting with our environment all the time. And in these open systems, energy and matter can be transferred between the system and its surroundings, right? So organisms are open systems. And of course, you probably also know that there are two fundamental laws of thermodynamics that govern energy transformations. And they govern these transformations in organisms and basically in all other collections of matter, as far as we know. So let's just go through those here briefly. So the first law of thermodynamics says that the energy of the universe is constant. So this means that energy can be transferred, it can be transformed, but it cannot be created or destroyed, right? And so this is basically, we can also call it the principle of the conservation of energy. And so, if we have a plant, for example, it's not correct to say that a plant is making energy, right? It's not generating energy that we then consume. It's actually just harvesting energy when it is able to transform the energy of light into chemical energy. Okay, and we'll talk more about that when we go through the process of photosynthesis. But basically, so energy cannot be created or destroyed. So very important first law. And then the second law of thermodynamics says that during every energy transfer or transformation, some energy is lost, right? And it's often lost as heat. But it basically says that there's not a perfect conversion of energy from one form to another. When conversion goes on, there's always a loss. And typically, it's a loss in the form of heat. And so basically what this means is that every energy transfer or transformation increases the disorder or entropy of the universe, right? It always increases the entropy of the universe. So, and this is, again, an example from the book that's showing an animal, a leopard here, eating some food, so taking in chemical energy, and then converting that into kinetic energy. But in the process of doing that, it's burning those, metabolizing those fuel molecules in the body. Waste products are being given off here in the form of water and carbon dioxide. And there's also heat that's generated in that process. So it's not a perfect conversion from chemical energy to kinetic energy, right? There's some loss there. So living cells convert organized forms of energy into heat. And I want to also point out that, and your book talks a lot about this as well, is that when a process like this is spontaneous, that means that it occurs without energy input. So there's some processes that require energy and some that don't. And the ones that don't, we call spontaneous. They happen without any expenditure of energy. And for this to happen, it has to increase the entropy of the universe. And if you want to think about this in terms of an equation, you probably know this, you've probably seen this before, the equation that relates the change in free energy here to the change in total energy, or enthalpy, here, minus the temperature times the change in entropy. Right? So there's a very simple relationship that tells us how much energy in the form of free energy is, and the reason it's called free energy is actually energy that's available to do work in the system, right? And so this is a way that we can think about how enzyme catalyzed reactions work, whether they're going to have, or just even a reaction in general. Is it going to be a spontaneous reaction or not? And as we'll see, most reactions that go on in metabolism are not spontaneous. They require an input of energy, and for that reason, they need to be catalyzed, or they would never you'd never actually generate enough products to have a living system function. Okay, so biological order and disorder. So cells are creating ordered structures from less ordered materials, and they're also replacing ordered forms of matter and energy with less ordered forms. Right. So this is going on all the time. So energy flows into an ecosystem in the form of light, ultimately from the sun, and exits in the form of heat. So that's kind of the general process that's happening during biological metabolic reactions. So you might be wondering, why does the evolution of more complex organisms not violate the second law of thermodynamics? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Does that kind of seem? I mean, just might sort of seem like a contradiction. I see a hand right there. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's right. So even though we're creating more ordered molecules, and that's true, what's happening in the process is that we're actually releasing energy in the form of heat, and that's increasing the entropy overall of the universe. So and that's sort of what my next slide says, is that basically entropy decreases. It might decrease locally in an organism, but overall the total entropy of the universe is increasing with all of these reactions. Okay, so that's why it doesn't violate the second law. Right. So another thing to keep in mind is that if we have reactions going on in a closed system, they eventually reach equilibrium. And when that happens, they don't do any work. There's no more work going on. Now, importantly, cells and organisms are not in equilibrium. If they are, they're dead, right? They're not. If once they reach equilibrium, they're not alive any longer. So when cells and organisms are alive, they're not in equilibrium. They are open systems that are experiencing a constant flow of materials in the form of light or molecules that are coming in and providing the energy to to transform molecules into other types of molecules, carry out all the processes that are required in the cell. Right? So a defining feature of life is that metabolism is never at equilibrium. And as we said, a catabolic pathway in a cell releases free energy in a series of reactions. And very importantly, this is not happening willy-nilly. These reactions are very highly regulated and carried out in steps by enzymes so that as energy is released, it can be harvested to do other things. Okay? To do other things, either to build other kinds of molecules, maybe to move the cell, allow the cell to move around, allow it to transport molecules across the membrane, as we talked about last week, that sort of thing. Okay? So, and very importantly, the free energy change of a reaction tells us whether or not the reaction occurs spontaneously. So as biologists, we want to understand which reactions occur spontaneously and which require the input of energy. And of course, the short answer is most reactions that we're interested in require the input of energy, but we need to know the difference. And to do that, we can determine the energy changes that occur during a chemical reaction. And as we said, we can think about that in the form of free energy. How much energy is actually available to do work? And the true definition of this is defined when temperature and pressure are uniform, like inside of a living cell under a certain set of conditions. And this just, again, shows you the free energy relationship here, indicating that the change in free energy during a process or a chemical reaction or even a whole set of chemical reactions is related to the change in enthalpy, which is, in this case, is sort of the total energy of the system, and the change in entropy, defined as this symbol here, delta S, and the temperature in Kelvin. So here's the equation. And importantly, only processes that have a negative delta G, a negative change in free energy, are spontaneous. Spontaneous processes can be harnessed to perform work. And so if you understand this relationship and you know what the free energy change is for a reaction, you immediately know whether it happens spontaneously or whether it would require energy to get it to occur. Now, is a spontaneous reaction a fast reaction? I think I heard, not necessarily, right? It could be fast, like an explosion or something, right? Fast, spontaneous. But it could be very slow. It could take a lot of time. It could still be spontaneous. It could happen over minutes or hours or days, but still the direction of the reaction would be the same and going ultimately towards equilibrium. Now, I like to, your book talks about, sort of plots energy in these bar graphs, and I actually prefer to show it to you like this, because this is more sort of how I think about it. I like to think about a plot that has free energy on the y-axis here, showing us where we can sort of see visually changes that happen in free energy as a function of the reaction coordinate on the x-axis. So this is sort of analogous to time, I guess, right? So sort of changes that occur during a chemical reaction over here. And so we can plot this, and the starting point of any reaction starts off with substrate molecules that are in what we call the ground state of the reaction. And they have some free energy value, right? They have some combination of potential energy, chemical energy that's there. And then if these substrates are going to be converted to products, there's a transition state that they have to go through to get over to products here. And so what you can see is that in the transition state of the reaction, there's an energetic barrier that these substrate molecules have to get across to get to the ground state. And in this example that you're seeing here, first of all, is this reaction spontaneous? Yeah, it is, right? Over time it is, because the products are actually lower in free energy. So there's a negative change in free energy that occurs in this reaction. But it might take a really long time, though, right? Because depending on the height of this barrier, these substrate molecules will have to get across this. And so as we're going to see, very, very typically, this is sort of a nice way to draw out a chemical reaction because it makes it easier to visualize or think about what happens when you have an enzyme involved that's responsible for effectively lowering this energetic barrier from getting to from substrates to products, or lowering this barrier. Right, so, and again, just important to remember that free energy change is occurring under a standard set of conditions that are defined over here. And then this diagram just sort of indicates the free energy of the transition state, which is shown right here. This is the overall change in free energy that occurs during the reaction. And then this is actually the change in free energy going just from substrates to products. And so this is what tells us that the reaction is actually spontaneous, because the value of delta G in this case is negative. So we have this nice relationship. Free energy is a measure of a system's instability, its tendency to change to a more stable state. During this spontaneous change, free energy decreases and the stability of a system increases. And of course, ultimately, if this were allowed to go to equilibrium, then you have sort of a maximum state of stability at that point, right? The rate of the forward reaction would be the same as the rate of the reverse reaction. You have an equilibrium situation. Right? And so a process is spontaneous. Another way to think about a spontaneous process is one that happens only when it's moving towards equilibrium. Right? Once equilibrium is reached, then it's done. So let's take a little break, pull out your clicker, and let's take a stab at the following question. Okay, so let's just take about a minute to answer this one, and I'm starting the clock right now. Okay, about 15 seconds. Okay, 5 seconds. 2, 1, stop. Okay, let's have a look. All right, so I still have to get this to display, sorry, but I'll tell you what I'm seeing here. So it looks like 62% of you voted for D, okay?